Good morning, everybody. David is out of town this week, so I'm filling in for him. All right, so the subject for the morning is, what do you want me to do for you? So we're glad to have all of you here this morning. If there's any visitors in our midst, we're glad to have you as well. There's a QR code on the back of the pew that you can scan and fill out an online comment card or a guest card. And there's also the gold one in front of you if you're kind of old school. But we're glad to have everybody here, visiting or not. Okay, so lots of people ask God for things. How many of you have asked God for something? I hope everybody. All right. What about this week? Okay, trick question. This week is today. So, so have you today? Okay. All right. But what if Jesus asked you this question? What do you want me to do for you? I seem to remember this question being asked in the Old Testament too. Anybody remember who was asked this question by God in the Old Testament? Solomon? Okay. There may have been others that I drew a blank on, but were there any other examples anybody had? Okay, lots of times, like I said, people ask God for things. We do that all the time. But it's rare, it seems like, that God, or in the case of today that we're talking about, Jesus, ask you point blank, what is it you want? You ever thought about how you would answer a question like that? What is it you want? So what do you think? What would you answer, Willie? Jesus says, what do you want? What's that? Oh, that he would help you follow his word? Okay, that's a good Bible class answer. All right. And anybody else? What is it you want? Yes, Randy. Help you on the road to heaven. Okay. All right, if you weren't in Bible class, what would your answer be? Same thing. I'm glad to hear that. So what did Solomon ask for? Wisdom, okay. Okay, the wisdom to lead the people. He was a young ruler, and he knew he didn't have the capacity on his own to lead a nation, and so that's what he asked for. What did God say he could have asked for? Okay, riches. What's that? Long life. Okay. What was a pretty common thing back then whenever you first got to be king? First thing new kings did. Kill all their enemies. Yep. And their family sometimes. Anybody that could be a threat to the throne. That might come and make a claim to the throne. So friends, family, enemies, they all got to go. But he didn't ask for the death of his enemies. He didn't ask for riches. He didn't ask for power or fame or anything like that. He asked for wisdom. Okay, so God gave him the riches and the fame as well as the wisdom. Okay, but we're going to look today at two times in the same chapter of the Bible, possibly within hours or even minutes of each other. Jesus asked this question to two different people, and he got two different answers. So we're going to talk about that today. All right. If I had a clicker. I know you brought me the clicker and then I left it on the table. All right. If you don't know, because she's changed a lot now, this is a rather old picture of my granddaughter Lily. And whenever she was this age, somewhere around 3 years old or so, she would sometimes come up to us and say, I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to say yes. She took the direct approach. As a matter of fact, she asked Denise one time, I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to answer, yes, Your Royal Highness. So we're going to talk about two different people that asked the question. And as a matter of fact, one of the times they almost did exactly what Lily said. So, in Mark chapter 10, verse 35 and 36, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. I mean, how do you like being asked that question? Okay, I want you to do what I'm going to ask. And I guess you're supposed to agree before you ever even hear what it is. But he very wisely said to them, what is it you want me to do for you? And they said to him, grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. All right, tell me about what they were asking for here. Explain in more detail what it is they really wanted and what they expected. Okay, or at least under the same umbrella. You know, it's kind of like, you know, the vice president comes and it's like, okay, I'm the vice president, but I'm speaking for the president. Yes?
They were still thinking Jesus was sent about an earthly kingdom.
Okay.
And they wanted to be the right-hand ruler and the left-hand ruler adjacent to him, and I forgot which one was on which side, as far as authority and power.
Okay. So they wanted to be the left and right, but what you usually call a right-hand man. Any other cases in like the Old Testament where there was a Bible figure that was the second in charge? Joseph, okay? That's who I was thinking of, maybe other examples. You also had Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that were kind of governors of a territory or something. So they wanted power. They wanted prestige. They wanted preeminence. And so this is what they were asking for. It may be helpful, though, to look at some context of when they asked this. So let's back up a couple of verses here. So that was 35 and 36. Let's back up to verse 32. They were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 and told them what was going to happen to him. We are going up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock and spit on him, flog him, and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. And so right after that, they're like, hey, we want to be to the left and right in your kingdom. So Jesus is probably thinking, were you listening to me? Did you hear what I just told you? Are you sure this is what you want? Because he says, I don't think it is. I don't think this is what you had in mind. But like a lot of people, including my mom, they heard what they wanted to hear. Anytime, we would talk to her, we'd call her on the phone. So how's Denise doing? Oh, she's sick. Oh, that's fine. She heard what she expected to hear me say. And that's what they did. They heard what they expected. They're like, he's speaking metaphorically. This is probably a parable or something. He's going to figuratively die or something like that. This is just, all of the campaign that's going to happen before we take back Israel from the Romans, and Jesus sits on the throne of David, and then there we're going to be at his right and left hand. So this is what they envisioned. All right, so then they asked Jesus, Jesus asked them, what would you like for me to do for you? And that was their response. Okay, so how did Jesus respond to them? It's in the text. Yeah. You don't know what you're asking for. Okay? So if he had given them what they asked for, what would they have gotten? Exactly what he got. They would be right there on his left and right hand. It was like, be careful what you wish for. I know, that's because you might get it. And sometimes that happens to us. And sometimes, thankfully, it doesn't happen to us. Sometimes God doesn't give us what we ask for. And then we'll look back later and say, we are so glad he did not give me what I asked for. So, I'm sorry.
The response from the apostles to Jesus, where it said, in your glory, that they want to sit on his left and right in your glory.
Mm-hmm.
What that glory really suggests, the physical glory of the king here on earth, or what that really glory in heaven. Because Jesus did, at other times, tell them about his death and resurrection.
Okay, I think I would answer yes. That's what they were envisioning. You know, glory here on earth, glory in heaven. I think they pictured it both ways. We're going to have a glorious reign here on earth, and then we'll go to heaven and we'll have a glorious reign there, and we'll be on the left and right the whole time. So yes, I think that's what they envisioned. But it wasn't what was going to come to pass. Not the way that they pictured it. So Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? What was this baptism? What's that? Okay. But neither of those is what he was referring to in this particular passage. The crucifixion is what he was referring to here, because that's what they were thinking. It was exactly what Becky said. They're thinking, yeah, I was baptized same way you were. We all went down there to the Jordan. John baptized you, and we don't know who baptized the apostles, but I'm sure somebody did. We don't have that recorded. And they're thinking, baptism? Yeah, no problem. We can do that. But he was speaking figuratively. He considered the baptism as what we call today a baptism by fire. If you've ever started a new job and you get there and you're completely overwhelmed, we call that a baptism by fire. It's probably happened to all of us. Yes, Denzel.
I think one of the things they overlooked was that Jesus chose them and the other apostles, and he was preparing them for what he did, that they had work to do.
Yes, they did. They absolutely had work to do. And in fact, he turns around right after that, and he says, they said, we can. And Jesus said, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they've been prepared. That's what they wanted, and he's like, that is what's going to happen. You are going to follow in my footsteps, and you're going to be baptized with this same baptism, referring to what? What's that? Death. That's what he's talking about. Yeah, not only did you follow me in this baptism by water, you're going to follow me in this same baptism I'm referring to. And by that he meant death as a martyr. You're going to be martyred. I know that Peter was crucified, and I think several of the others, according to tradition. We don't have it from biblical accounts, but all but one of the apostles were martyred, and some of them by crucifixion. So he says, yes, you are going to be baptized with this same baptism. The same thing is going to happen to you. You are going to get martyred for my sake. But then he asked the intriguing question, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they've been prepared. What does he mean by that? Okay, he says God picks those things. He's, as far as who has preeminence or power or glory or anything, he says, I'm not picking that right now. That's not what we're doing here. Right now, we're about to go and do crucifixion first. Yes, Nathan?
In Revelation 4, it speaks about the 12 elders that were around doing God, praising God. One commentary suggests that these 24 were made up of a combination of the 12 apostles and the 12 tribes of Israel. Do you think that maybe they thought when they won that this war, in fact, those 24 was who was around to do God?
It's
Confirmed. It's just speculation.
right. It is speculative, and any answer that I give is going to be speculative as well. But that is the image that we had. There are a couple of problems with this being, the 12 sons here that made up the 12 tribes, and then the 12 apostles. For one thing, John had the vision, and he's not dead. So was he in that vision? Was this a vision of a future event? And maybe that was John there. We're not real sure whether this was a real-time image of what was going on or whether this is what's going to happen at some point in the future. But we do know that was the imagery that was given. It represented the Old Testament, represented the New Testament during that time, and all the people that were saved in both of those covenants. And so that's what we know, is that was the metaphorical picture. We have no idea whether those images of heaven we get in the book of Revelation are real, or whether they're just, something to give us a sense of what things are going to be like. What we do know is that human language cannot convey what heaven is going to be like. There are no words for what John saw up there, and we don't even know if what he saw was accurate or whether it was toned down for his human mind at that time. But I think this may be kind of what he was referring to there, is those 24 elders that surrounded on God on his throne in heaven. If it's not that, I don't know what he was referring to. That is my image of what he meant. Was in heaven, this is kind of what it's going to look like, but he may have had something else in mind instead or in addition to. So if you were expecting a good answer for that, I don't have one. You can ask David when he gets back, and maybe he does. Okay, thoughts or comments? You just scratching, Becky, or did you have a comment? Okay. All right. So the apostles misunderstood what Jesus was talking about here. That much is clear. And so whenever they ask, whenever he asked them what do they want, and they told him, they had a very different picture than what it is what Jesus said is in store for them. There wasn't going to be any thrones for anybody to sit on in this life. All he was promising was hard work and a reward of being martyred. And so that was what he presented to them as being the options. And sometimes we kind of have a similar misunderstanding. And sometimes it is possible that we give prospective or new Christians the wrong impression too of what to expect. You're now going to become part of God's kingdom, and you're going to be adopted as sons and daughters, and Jesus will take care of you. And so people start getting this concept. From now on, my life is going to be perfect. I'm not going to have any more problems or anything because now I'm a Christian. So did that come true for any of you? All right, this certainly didn't for me. There are always problems. And if somebody tries to tell you, or if you try to tell somebody else, things are going to be problem-free when you become a Christian, you're sadly misguiding them, because that's not the way it is. Okay? That Jesus will take away all the consequences of sin after here. There's a difference between taking away your sin and taking away the consequences of it. So what are the consequences of sin? Okay, can be death. What'd you say, Ron? Oh, okay, sorry, I thought that was Ron. Yeah, all of these are effects. Are there any other effects in this lifetime of sin? Okay. And I heard somebody else over here. Pain, suffering, disease. Oh, okay. What? Prison, possibly, yeah. Heartache, definitely. No matter what else you get, that's part of it, is going to be heartache. Okay. All these things are consequences of sin, and these are still going to happen. And those aren't going to disappear because the sin was forgiven. All those consequences still exist. Whether it is a child that you brought into the world, which can be a blessing, but also bring its own problems and issues. Whether it's a disease that you got, or a prison that you went to, or even just the feeling of guilt that we have knowing that we did something wrong. Even though we may realize we've been forgiven, sometimes we have a harder time forgiving ourselves than God has of forgiving us. And so sometimes we have to live with that, knowing that we wronged somebody, even though we may have considered it justified at the time. Okay? That Jesus will fix all my relationship problems once I become a Christian. So I know nobody in here has any relationship issues, but sometimes they happen to people. And Jesus doesn't promise that. What did he promise instead? Okay, he says, I'll be here, but what's going to happen? He says, I came here to, okay, he came here to save, but he said, you're going to have family issues. I'm going to turn brother against brother and father against child, and it's going to create problems when you become a Christian, especially if you come from a different background. If you were raised in a Jewish household, or if you were not raised in a household where you went to church at all of any type, then whenever you become a Christian, far from eliminating those problems, it's probably going to exacerbate any problems that you have. You're turning your back on the religion that you grew up in. And that can be painful and hurtful. You may have had it go the other way. You raised a child going to the church, and now they're not, or they're going somewhere else. And you're wondering, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently to keep that from happening? Because now they're not going to church, or they're going to one that I don't know is going to provide them salvation. And so it can be painful and stressful. Sometimes we expect Jesus is going to take away our struggles. And that's not going to happen, not until we get to heaven. We're still going to have struggles. The apostles still had struggles. All Jesus promised them was martyrdom. He did not promise them a trouble-free life. Christians were sometimes not only executed, but sometimes tortured first. And so that's the only promise that he made. He didn't promise to protect them from that. He just said, I'll be there with you. and you know what hope you have for after death. But the death is still going to come. And sometimes it's going to be a pretty unpleasant death. Okay? So that's what Jesus is offering you. How can you turn down an offer like that? I'm going to offer you problems and relationship issues and possibly even suffering and death. So are you in? That's very different than what the apostles pictured whenever they asked him this question. Okay, what are your thoughts? Yes, Nizza.
Example of the last one you made was Stephen.
Was what? Stephen? Yeah, he definitely did not get this, did he? He was part of the army of the Lord, I guess, but as part of that, he was the first Christian martyr. And being stoned to death is probably not the most pleasant way to go. So, yes, Ron.
There's a line out in the movie, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" And if you remember when they went down into the water and the individual was baptized, he came up and he said, "Oh, all my sins have been forgiven. Everything I've ever done." George Clooney looked at him and he said, "Yes, but that bank you robbed, you still gotta pay the state with your time for that bank that you robbed."
And if you still have the money, you probably got to give that back too. The consequences are still there. The court system doesn't say, "Oh, you've been forgiven. All right, go in peace." There would be a lot fewer people in prison if that were the case, but you still have to suffer those consequences of what it is that you do. All right. So what do we get from Jesus? Besides all of these things that we're not going to get from Jesus from becoming a Christian, what will we get? We're going to get some opportunities. You're going to get a chance to spend your time doing some positive things. But he's not looking to just say, "All right, come here and come once a week and sit in a pew for 2 hours and listen to some people talk." That is not the deal that he's making with you. He says, "Come here expecting to be put to work, because I got things for you to do." And so that's what he's offering, is I'm going to let you be busy doing the things that I want you to do. So it may not be the things you otherwise would have chosen. Sometimes you get to do something that you like for the church. Sometimes you do some things that might not have been your first choice, but they're things that need to be done. And so you're going to have those opportunities. So whether it's working with kids, whether it's taking the gospel to people that are anxious to study it, or whether it's cleaning the church building, there's always something that needs to be done. And there's nobody that is above doing those kind of things in the service. Remember Jesus washing people's feet. Any job that needs to be done is a job that is available for us to do. So expect that may happen with you. Okay, he's offering us love, but not necessarily approval of our actions. So a lot of people says, "Well, God loves me, so what difference does it make what I do? God's going to love me no matter what I do." So is that true? That part is true. But there's always a but, right? What is the but on the end? What's that? Okay, there are consequences of what you do. He says, just because you have love and you have grace, Romans chapter 6 tells us that's not an excuse to sin. He says that's not the idea at all. He says you completely miss the boat if you think that the concept of grace is just so that you can keep on doing all the same things that you did before except be forgiven for them. He says that's not the way that that this is set up. He said, you're going to have grace, but the idea is you've repented. You have made the decision to change your life. And your grace is based on your faith. And how you demonstrate your faith is what you do. So if we read James, James tells us that our faith is demonstrated in all those things that we do. Whether they're good or bad, that's going to expose what you really think. Okay, we're going to have forgiveness, but not permission to keep on doing those same things. It's not even to say that God's going to stop forgiving you, but that's not what he has in mind for your life. You're not living by faith if you don't make changes, if you don't eliminate the sinful things out of your life. That's his expectation of you. Our grace covers us, but don't push the grace to the limits. That's his goal for your life, is don't try to live on the edge. What is the most I can do wrong and still manage to be saved? That's not the intent that he has for you. Okay? He may provide healing for you. Not always total healing. There may be things that don't get healed, like Paul. Do you remember Paul had a thorn in the flesh? We don't know what it was, and I think that was deliberate, that he didn't tell us what it was so that we can identify with him. Whatever his thorn was may be the same thing that you struggle with, and you don't know. And he doesn't always promise to get rid of it. He promises to save you in spite of it, but you can't always expect to be healed. In the series The Chosen, which isn't entirely scriptural, it's not unscriptural necessarily, but it goes beyond the scriptures and sets up backstories of all the apostles and lets you get to know them and things like that. One of the things, the James the Less in there, it portrays him as having a limp. And so he goes to Jesus and says, couldn't I serve you better if I didn't have this limp? And Jesus made a decision not to heal him. Why do you think that might have been? I mean, I realize this is fictitious, but it's also real. We also have things. God hasn't healed my back problems. My back still hurts. I have lots of things that hurt now. I always say I hurt in places I didn't even know I had places. But God doesn't always heal those things. And why is that? Okay, we put our faith in him. But I put my faith in him and I didn't get healed.
But if everything about you is perfect, you can tend to put your faith in yourself.
Okay, all right, I like that. If she said if everything about me physically was perfect, I wouldn't need faith in him. Then I could just put faith in myself. I can do whatever I want now because I'm so healthy. I'm like I remember being in my 20s, where I was invincible. So, okay. So sometimes he does choose not to heal us. And sometimes he does heal us. And it's his decision. Jesus didn't heal every single person he came in contact with whenever he was here on earth. Whenever he healed somebody, it was for a reason. And generally, it was to produce faith. Sometimes it was a result of faith. Sometimes he says, your faith has healed you. So there were people that got healed and people that weren't healed during that time.
Your weakness may be how he's leading you to do the things he wants you to do, whereas if you didn't have that weakness, you'd be all doing the things you want to do.
Okay, he says your weakness might be him leading you in the direction that he wants. Okay, yes, Mark.
St. James, it talks about blessed is the one that stands fast through those trials for him receive the crown.
Okay, sometimes there's a reason why we have various infirmities. Sometimes it's to make us more dependent. on God or on others. And it keeps us humble whenever we realize, okay, we've got limitations as well. But we have an unlimited God who will help. I think I lost my audio. There, we come back. To help us through whatever we need. Yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking that it also helps us to be able to relate to others who may be suffering that same.
Absolutely. If I'm a perfect physical specimen, how am I going to identify with you whenever you've got an issue? You've got hurts, and we've got hurts. We all hurt together. And sometimes that's what we need to keep us trusting God and to depending on God's help and keep asking for God's help with the things that we need. Yes?
I was in the gym yesterday and struggling with exercise. I wanted pain challenge because of a back pain. A few minutes later, I saw a guy walking the back road and he couldn't walk properly. And a few minutes after that, a second guy passed by who also was challenged with his legs and he couldn't move. And the only thing I could say was, Lord, because I was at a place Sunday.
Yep. That's right. Sometimes seeing other people makes us appreciate what we have. I saw a cartoon one time where there was a guy driving a sports car, and he looked up and he saw a helicopter, and he said, I wish I had a helicopter. And then it showed a guy in a broken down vehicle, and he says, oh, I wish I had a sports car. And it showed a guy on a bicycle looking at the guy in the broken down vehicle saying, I wish I had a car. It showed the guy walking, and he saw the guy on the bike. I wish I had a bike. It showed the guy that was crippled seeing the guy walk, and he said, I wish I could walk. There's always somebody better off. There's always somebody worse off. And it all depends on who you compare yourself to as to whether you feel blessed or whether you feel neglected. Okay. Any other comments? So how did the other apostles feel whenever they found out what happened? Okay, what about us? Why is it just you two? How are y'all going to be the ones picked to be on the right hand and on the left hand? What about Peter? He's the one that made the great confession and everything. Why wouldn't he be one of those two? So they all wanted to sit on thrones as well. So Jesus points out to them. He says the Gentiles want to have authority over others, and they serve themselves. And so essentially he's saying, maybe this wouldn't be the best thing for you. Sitting on thrones and being revered by the population and everything, it kind of gives images of a Catholic bishop or something that comes in and he's like, here, you may kiss my ring. That's the image that I get of it, is somebody like the Pharisees and the Sadducees who liked the adoration that they got from the population. And you get the idea, this is what the apostles had in mind. Is, I want all that respect and admiration and people to call me rabbi as I walk around. So he says, you can join the Jesus life. He said that's a little bit different. He says, but it's not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be the slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. So that pretty much shut him down. He says, you're thinking about this all wrong. It's not about you being above everybody else. It's about you being a servant to everybody else. And I think that was demonstrated in the washing of the apostles' feet. He said, this isn't about glory and adoration of people. He said, this is about doing the Lord's work. And that's why you're here. And verse 45, I think, is a pivotal theme in the book of Mark. It says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So have you been asked to give your life? That has two connotations there, sort of, Calvin.
One time, Christ said, "Follow me, you must first deny yourself."
Okay.
And that's a central theme. And Satan seems to want to go against that by having us want these other things. We're not looking at denying ourselves to serve others. Satan wants to divide us. He wants to make us want to be that high up person that wants to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
That first principle of deny yourself. And then the other principle is love. If you're doing things out of love, you're not doing it for selfish reasons. You're doing it because you really care and love someone. So Paul said, if you have not love, you're nothing.
Mm-hmm. So he says, love is the basis for everything. Love and humility. And so then we have humility, and then we realize that we have humility, and then we become proud of how humble we are. So it's kind of a never-ending cycle. Okay, now I've got the pride back in my life again. Now I've got to be humble again, and hopefully I won't realize how humble I am, because then I'll have pride again. But it's all based on love, about serving other people and putting other people's needs ahead of your own, and saying, you know, I need this, but they need something a lot more important than what I need. So I'm going to spend my time or my money on them. Yes, sir.
Jesus always seemed to have a way of turning the questions that came to him around on people, something they couldn't figure out. And I was thinking, if, you know, they were like, we want to be at your right and left, and not these other guys. And if he'd have said to him, well, you know, the right is really usually considered better, so which one of you two should be at my right?
Yes.
They've been fighting with each other.
That's true. I would have kind of expected that would have been something that he would have been willing to do. But he didn't in that case. But yes, you're right. Jesus had a way of taking a situation or a question and turning it around. And people would continually try to trap Jesus, and he always managed to know that way of escape. Okay, but the apostles weren't the only ones in this trip that Jesus asked that question to, of what do you want me to, or what do you want from me? So let's start in verse 46 and continue reading. And then they came to Jericho, as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Then Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Okay, so Jesus again asked somebody, "What do you want me to do for you?" And so what did he want? Okay, and who was he? I don't mean his name, he was Bartimaeus, but what was his station in life? What's that? He had a very low station. He was a beggar. That was about as low as it got in society, aside from being a tax collector, probably. But that was about as low as it got. And he was calling out for Jesus, and people were saying, "Hush, hush, leave Jesus alone. Jesus is important. You don't want to bother him with this." But Jesus heard him. Jesus said, "Hey, tell him to come to me." And so he threw aside his cloak and he ran to Jesus. The Bible doesn't waste words. We don't get information for no reason. What was the significance of him throwing aside his cloak? Any thoughts on that? Yes, Calvin.
Well, for one thing, that was a very valuable piece of clothing, because you could freeze to death in a desert area if it get cold at night. And he had no thought of that. He wanted to get to Jesus. That was the most important thing to him, above the value of that coat.
Okay. Yeah, clothes were very valuable at that time. It wasn't like going to Walmart and saying, I need a new shirt. Clothes were among people's most valuable possessions, but especially to a blind beggar. I mean, he had nothing. So about the only things he had in life was what he was wearing. And he takes that cloak that beggars would use to spread out to collect donations and threw it aside. Sorry. He threw it aside, indicating he had faith that he wasn't going to need that anymore, or at the very least, that he would be able to go back and find it again. I mean, if you're blind and you take something valuable and throw it, how would you ever expect to find it again? But he had confidence he was either not going to need it or be able to go back and find it whenever he did. So he talks to Jesus and he calls him Son of David, indicating that, that was a reference in the Old Testament to the Messiah, indicating that he knew who Jesus was, and he also had faith that Jesus would be able to heal him. How? We don't really know that. Apparently he's heard of Jesus. The crowd may have been buzzing about him. He has the power to heal people, and so whatever it was that he heard instilled faith in Bartimaeus. But he didn't ask for a throne and be next to Jesus. It kind of goes back to my reference to the cartoon. It all depends on where you are as to what it is that seems great to you. If only I had this, then that would be great. He had no imagination that he would be seated on a throne next to Jesus. He just wanted to be able to see. Something we take for granted all of the time. We wake up in the morning, and when we open our eyes, we expect to see. We don't expect to wake up blind. And this was the most important thing to him. Do you see any symbolism in this? Is there anybody blind today? And I don't mean physically. Okay? There's a lot of people that are blind to Jesus today that need to be able to see. And so that was possibly a representation here. Like I said, Jesus always had a reason for healing people. He was always making a point of some type. And in this case, he was making the point of, this man needs to see physically, but all of you need to see spiritually. Even the apostles. What had just happened a few verses earlier, he went and described to them what was going to happen to them, and then his apostles are saying, hey, can we sit on thrones beside you? And he's like, were you not listening when I said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to be killed? Where are these thrones you think you're going to be sitting on? But this man, he wanted his sight. And the apostles needed that same sight to be able to see what was going on. This was the third time, actually, that Jesus had described to them what was going to happen. Yes?
In their defense, they had witnessed him raise people from the dead.
Absolutely.
On paper.
That's
He
true.
talks about being killed, but then, and he talks about himself being raised. So what is to give them the clue that the kingdom is changing?
That's true. They could have been thinking, okay, after you get raised from the dead and we finish all that, then I guess you're going to go sit on David's throne. And there were prophecies that talked about the Messiah sitting on David's throne. And so they didn't realize that was metaphorical, that his kingdom was not of this earth and that he wasn't going to be on an earthly throne. But in their defense, who would expect that? There had been many messiahs before that. We're studying the book of Judges, and all of these different leaders, these judges, these military leaders that were raised up, were all the form of a messiah, somebody that had been promised to go and save the nation of Israel. And in fact, David had spent the whole time of his time in office as king preparing the way for his son Solomon. He was trying to defeat all of his enemies so that Solomon wouldn't have anybody that he had to go and fight in his lifetime. And so David was a form of that Messiah that was restoring the power and prestige to Israel. And so when they said he's going to sit on David's throne, they could probably be excused at first for not realizing that was a spiritual sense and not a physical sense. Okay? But Bartimaeus, his needs were simple. He's like, my life would be perfect if I could just see. And so, if you know somebody that has been blind, you might get a little sense of how it is that they feel. That especially if they have had sight before and they know what they lost. I always wondered which is worse, to be blind all your life and never know what sight even means, or whether to have it and then realize what you had lost at that time. I'm not sure which is worse. But he was aware that it was something that he needed. And it's something that a lot of people are not aware that they need today. They've got physical sight, but not that spiritual sight that they're looking for. Okay? Comments, questions, thoughts, objections? Yes?
I see, after Jesus gave him his sight, Jesus told him to go his way, but he decided to follow Jesus.
His way was Jesus' way. There is even a tradition that said that he followed Jesus into Jerusalem, that he followed him to the cross, and that he was a believer, which is understandable. If anybody that heals your blindness along the way, sounds like somebody that it's a good idea to follow. Like I said, tradition tells us he did become a follower of Jesus, and it's certainly easy to believe that. One other, I don't know if you consider it trivia or not, but Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem to be crucified at this point. And when he called Bartimaeus and healed him, and Bartimaeus followed him, Bartimaeus was probably the last disciple that Jesus called during his lifetime here. So I don't know if there's any significance to that, but I just found that interesting, that he was probably the final one that Jesus personally called to follow him. Okay? So, what do you see as the difference between these two requests? The apostles ask for power, prestige, and glory, and Bartimaeus asked for sight. So compare and contrast those. I know it's a teacher question, right? Compare and contrast. Perhaps. In one sense, were both requests self-serving? Okay, one more so than the other. One was something somebody needed. The other one was something that somebody wanted. Yes? Okay. So little bit of difference between them, but there is a lot of significance to these. They were self-seeking in terms of what they needed on a very personal level, and perhaps Bartimaeus was too. But once he received it, it increased his faith, and he became a follower. So, yes, Cal.
The two disciples asking for a right left did not appreciate that they were already at a very high level of being the closest friends. I mean, Nobody's even looking at him that way. So there's some huge contrast there. One's in a high, two in a high place and not even realizing they're in a high place. And here's this other person just wanting to be normal. Really something that's necessary to earn a living.
Okay.
That's what I was gonna say, how he'd be able to earn a living.
Yeah, that's true. He could go out and do anything he wanted, but what was the one thing he wanted? To follow Jesus. So, a good example for us today. So, who is it that you can serve today? Do you ever ask yourself that question? It's not the kind of thing that usually we wake up and ask ourselves. Who can I serve today? But perhaps it's one we should ask ourselves more often. So many times it's like, what am I going to do today? A lot of times, what am I going to do for me today? What do I need to do? Instead of, what can I do for somebody else today? Was that a hand or? Oh, okay. All right. Who are we serving and not expecting anything in return from? Something to think about. So, the way that Jesus helped people was one person at a time. During his ministry, during his life here, he went from place to place, seeing who he could serve, seeing who he could help. And then at the end of his life, he saw everybody and says, okay, I can help everybody. And this was something that he was able to do, that he had the power to do. And even though he had this power, he wasn't too good to stop and help a nobody, because he didn't see them as a nobody. He saw everybody as having the same intrinsic value. And sometimes we tend to not think that today. You know, is this person worth my time to go and try to evangelize? And everybody is worth your time. They may not accept. Sometimes we can logically look and say, I think I'm more likely to be able to have an effect if I spend my time on this person than this one. But everybody has that same value, and everybody needs the help as much as everybody else. So, I just wanted to leave you with the thought of, what is your personal mission today? Is it searching for things to improve your life, or is it being able to help those around you? Not just help them with their physical needs, but with their spiritual needs as well. So it kind of comes down to that. What's your personal mission in life? And if you think back on it and you think, well, it's been kind of self-serving up until now, it's not too late to fix it. You still have time to make that personal mission be something that Jesus would want you to have. Any final thoughts before we close? All right, let's close with a prayer. Our Father, we come before your throne, thanking you as always for all the gifts that you give to us, and especially for the gift of Jesus, your Son, who gave up his life in heaven to come down to this earth and to experience the things that we experience every day. Our Father, we pray that as we look on his life and his death, his sacrifice, that we can look at our own lives and we can change our mission and our thoughts and our objectives to match those of you. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Thanks for your attention this morning.